Hey guys, GhazzyTV here with another Path of Exile video, and in this one I'm going to talk mostly about the gear progression for Dark Pact. Now Dark Pact is one of my favorite builds in the game. I also believe it to be one of the strongest builds in the entire game, and one of the main reasons for this is because it's barely been nerfed at all since it was released. The reason for this is because very few people play it. The magical thing that has happened is that this league, it seems that there's a lot more people playing it, and I think it's pretty cool to see. So before I talk about gear progression, I want to mention a few things because of how complex this build is, and I tackle all of these topics in my videos as well as in the written guide. But I wanted to clarify a couple of things to make sure that this is easier for people to understand. When it comes to the damage output, it's very important that the life of our skeletons matters so much. So for example, in the low budget, fully geared low budget gear set for the build, has a HP of 22.6 thousand HP on the skeletons. This matters because of the HP taken away and the sacrifice by the Dark Pact is then getting a base damage based on this HP. So understanding this, that increases the value or the perceived value of minion life modifiers. This is why jewels that we're going to be using will all have minion life on them. Don't forget life for yourself. But before we dive into this, I wanted to mention a couple of things. The couple things I want to mention is the defensive layers, which I am tackling in a separate video, which will be linked in the descriptions below, by the way. And this is done through the recoup mechanics of infused flesh, as well as vampirism, and making sure that we never reserve more than 49% of our HP. This video will tackle this more in detail. This is to allow us to have pain attunement, and petrified blood will prevent us from getting above 50% HP, making sure that we're always considered on low life. Now with this, and us having a source of life leech to our HP pool creates a state of overleeching. When you get to the point of having at least 2000 energy shield on the low budget build, that's when you can spec into Ghost Reaver. Now you can do it sooner, but it's a matter of personal preference. I prefer about 2000 energy shield. The reason for this is to make any sources of leech that we have apply to our energy shield instead. Now the reason this works very fine is because of the application of vitality with this specific build. Now, if you look at the configurations or the stats here on the left-hand side, you can see that we actually have a life regen of 364 HP. We also have reserved a lot of HP, and every time we take damage, we are going to be recovering that through the recoup mechanic. We also recover this through petrified blood. This will be more than enough. The build also has at least one life flask in the early stage, which we're taking away once we get to this point where we don't have any life flask. It is fair to point out, though, that when you play this build, the two main risks of dying with this character is actually chaos damage. This puts a little bit of pressure on chaos resistance, which one shouldn't focus on in the early stage of gear progressing, but you want to make sure that if you have the possibility to get chaos rest, it is highly preferable. However, the other point of this is that, as you can see in the configuration settings here and the numbers, it doesn't have very much physical damage mitigation. So very high hard target or damaging physical hits can still be detrimental to the build. It is very much tanky though. Despite this number, we are actually extremely tanky. And this is because the petrified blood doesn't actually cover EHP scaling in Path of Building together with a recoup mechanic for the sustaining of this. Now, this is very advanced information, and it's covered more in depth with the video linked in the description. I just wanted to point out that having a source of life leech, which you can get from influenced amulet, for example, and this will allow you to leech on your HP together with the defensive layers of this build, allows you to be very tanky. However, once you get about 2000 energy shield, which you get from having energy shield based on your gear, you can actually run that together with Ghost Reaver with his life leech. And with this mechanic, you can then sustain your energy shield in a better way, but also your life is covered through recoup mechanics. So that's basically how the defenses work. Offensively, this build does so much damage if you understand the offenses of it. Again, a link in the description will cover this in detail, so I don't want to waste this video on that. Instead, I'm going to talk about gear progressing. So when you start off with a build, obviously you're going to be casting out your skeletons and then casting Dark Pact on them. Very important to point out that the order of efficiency when it comes to your Dark Pact skills would be Spell Echo and also Chain. And the reason Chain is so important is because the Dark Pact itself has 2 chains and the normal chain support has another 2. This means that your 4+ chains makes your Dark Pact hit 5 times. So as long as you have 5 or more skeletons out, your Dark Pact will chain between up to 5 skeletons. And all of these chains will then be able to hit any target up to 5 times then because of the amount of chains. That's also why in the higher budget versions we'll use Woke Chain. So the important, again, spell echo into chain, and then after that, it doesn't really matter. Gear progressing as you're starting off. There's a couple of things to point out that are very important. First one is that the HP of your skeletons matters very much. This allows us to use something like a Vol Summon skeleton in combination with the Vol Caress. Now, the reason this is so good is because the Vol Caress gives you +5 levels of Vol Socketed gems and -5 to non-Vols. Now, Minion Life is not a Vol gem, which means this will be hurt by -5 levels, but because of the base HP getting scaled by the Vol Summon skeletons by it being socketed in these gloves, that would obviously be a preferable idea to run. So we want to have a Vol Summon skeleton, and we want to run that inside the Vol Caress with Minion Life, and obviously Feeding Frenzy, together with probably the Golem if you want to run one of those. So in this case, as you can see here, we actually have a Flame Dash in there, and that doesn't really matter. In the leveling progression, you can use a Golem, and later you'll be removing this entirely because we'll be using Spectres and later Enemy Guardian instead. So we're going to be running Flame Dash, Minion Life, Feeding Frenzy together with Vol Summon Skeletons. And once you use the Vol Summon Skeleton ability for bosses, for example, or when you're mapping, you get a 20-second duration of Onslaught, which is very, very nice for clear speed increase. After this, the next point, in my opinion, that to be upgraded would actually be to get a Blessed Rebirth Jewel. This requires item level 68, and it is found on a medium cluster jewel with minion HP. What's really important to point out here is that this is the only modifier that matters on a low budget scaling. If you want to push the build up to higher budget, you want to add a Hulking Corpses. That is the best secondary modifier for this jewel that gives you increased minion life. And the third thing to think about if you want to have a better version is to make sure that the passive amount on the jewel is 4 or 5. If it is 4, you can get a Blessed Rebirth and get immediately into the jewel socket. If you have 5 passives and you have 2 notables, you don't have to waste any extra nodes to get the jewel sockets. However, to keep the cost down, you can absolutely buy one of these for literally 1 chaos if it is a 6 passive medium cluster and alteration craft it till you hit the Blessed Rebirth. That is absolutely possible to do when it costs almost nothing, which is why this is such a good build for low budget approaches. So this would be the secondary thing to think about when it comes to upgrading your character. Get that Blessed Rebirth. The third thing to upgrade and is a little bit tricky because now we're talking about the differences on how much value you get for your currency invested. So there's a couple of different routes, and my suggested approach would be to make sure that you have a trigger wand, preferably with +2 level of minion skills, which would be +1 level of spell skills and +1 level of minion skills. However, for this build, you can choose to ignore that as your third upgrade and stick with a +1 as long as you have modifiers such as spell damage or increased critical to your spells or even crit multi, as long as you have a trigger craft to automate your offering and your desecrate. Now, so what would then be the third upgrade? Well, the cool thing with Dark Pact is that there are the upgrades for the build is extremely linear. Almost all of the upgrades gives you equal value to the build. You can have extra level of skills, you can go for higher numerical values, you can go for an amulet that instead of having the Chaos Leech, you can have a Chaos Leech as well as a plus level of skills for you. You can go for a better Bone Ring, for example, with higher amount of minion HP. You can go for better numerical values on boots for more energy shield, for example, together with the life and energy movement speed. You can try to get a helmet with plus level of minion skills, plus level of 2 minion skills, which is really cool. And the cool thing with these things is that once you've gotten all of these approaches, the step that you want to take after this is actually looking into the upgrades to the higher budget versions. Now, the higher budget versions have 3 main items that would be separating the idea of low budget and higher budget version. The reason I don't have a medium budget version is because of the linear scaling of upgrades, which basically means that any upgrade you choose to do from the low budget will be able to be squeezed into the low budget version, but that is based for the higher budget version. So whatever you choose to run with will be of equal value, except for 3 different items. These 3 different items is some pieces that I will be showing you here in this video and talk about the differences on them. So I'm going to be taking the defensive PUB version, and I'm going to show this on a second PUB window, and I'm going to talk about them. So this PUB here on the screen right now is the low budget version, and I'd like POB to load up. And we will be doing this with the defensive higher budget version. So the three big pieces, normally when looking at a POB like this, people would assume that, hey, GHAZZY, shut the fuck up. It's the clusters. It's not the clusters. Not even close to the clusters. These are just extra added damage in the end. The clusters are not even close to the biggest upgrades for this character. However, I would arguably say that the medium clusters do have a pretty big impact on your damage output. But we're not just looking at damage when it comes to this build. We're looking at combining the efficiency of our EHP sustaining as well as our damage output, and quality of life matters a lot. So first off, Triggercraft will automate our offering. Super important, which is why I consider that to be an important, crucial initial upgrade together with the Volker Res before you look at other things, as well as getting the Blessed Rebirth. So, what are the three big pieces? Number one, your skeletons will be resummoned versus single target boss fights consistently in the higher endgame content, not because they are dying within the 4 seconds, because they're immortal due to Blessed Rebirth. They're actually dying because when you do too much damage or do enough casts per second, you will kill them with your Dark Pact by sacrificing their HP. To prevent this, in the low budget version, I believe it's in as well, you want to get yourself a Divergent Dark Pact. So what Divergent Dark Pact does is that when you are hitting an enemy, all your minions will recover 2% of their max HP. So when you cast Dark Pact, one skeleton will then sacrifice 8% of its HP and take that as chaos damage. If they have some chaos rest, which they actually do 20% base, they will take that as chaos damage. And then you hit an enemy and all your minions recovers 2% HP. The next skeleton will then sacrifice 8% of its HP, take that as chaos damage, and all your minions recovers 2% of its max HP. So with a Divergent Dark Pact, even the skeletons that you are sacrificing HP from will immediately get back up to full HP. So with the scaling of HP that we have in our skeletons, even after Blessed Rebirth has taken its course of its 4 seconds, you actually should never, ever, ever need to resummon skeletons versus single target boss fights because of the Divergent Dark Pact. This is a crucial quality of life upgrade, which will make endgame very, very smooth. This is not super important early in the game, but for the end maps and specifically pinnacle endgame bosses, this is one of the best upgrades you can do, and which will be considered a higher budget upgrade. Now, I don't know how the market will look with this amount of people playing this build, but it's definitely something you need to take into consideration. And let me put it this way. It is more important to have a Divergent Dark Pact than it is to have a level 21-20 normal Dark Pact. The damage doesn't matter because of how valuable the quality of life is. You get so much extra damage uptime by having a Divergent Dark Pact, so do make sure to get one. Second upgrade that would have a significant upgrade compared to the linear scaling for this build is obviously going back to gearing. Now, we talked about the differences between quality of life, damage, and sustaining, and these two next upgrades has a lot to do with sustaining quality of life. So I'm going to talk about sustain first. It is not a super big upgrade, which I would start with, but it would definitely be the third in this list when it comes to big upgrades, and that would actually be the Watcher's Eye. And the reason I'm talking about the Watcher's Eye is because this will give you energy shield per enemy hit while affected by discipline. By taking this node, we no longer need to have Ghost Reaver and can therefore thrive on our Chaos Leech B for our HP pool again. And by having that sorted, the amount of hits we're doing per second, now if you look at the PUB here on the high budget version, we actually have a situation of us casting 6.91 times per second. This is then multiplied by 5 if you're using normal chain, and it would then be with a woke chain, it would actually be 6 because you get an additional chain from the woke version. So if you look at 6.91 without the woke chain, that would be times 5. That's 34.55 hits per second. And the energy shield that would give me would be 28. That's almost 1,000 energy shield per second. This is how we don't need energy shield leeching. It would obviously still be preferable to have, which is why we're speccing into spell damage leeches like energy shield in the higher budget version. But this is one of the bigger sustain approaches that we can upgrade with. Now, for the higher budget version, I wouldn't focus too much in this because I'd rather look at damages before I get this, but it's very important to understand the value of that modifier. Obviously, you can have mods like Life Recovery or Vitality. This is for Flask, which doesn't really matter, but you can have things like Energy Shield recovery per second from Cemetery, which will actually ramp up the ES leech, not ES on hit. So there's a bunch of other modifiers you can go for, but this jewel is exclusively upgraded and is focused on sustaining. So what is then the biggest upgrade outside of Divergent Dark Pact that I would actually focus on? And that is the Glorious Vanity jewel. Now, what is so cool with the Glorious Vanity? I'm going to put this up on the big screen for you boys. The Glorious Vanity needs to be of Doriani. What this does is that it gives us the possibility to change the CI node in the top right corner into a Corrupted Soul. This makes it so that chaos damage, 50% of this does not bypass our energy shield. This is important for the higher body build because we're now going to put a lot more pressure on our energy shield rather than our life to alleviate as much pressure as possible because of the defensive layers of this build, making it so that we want to have a huge buffer of energy shield. And once that is being hit or we take a big enough damage to deplete that, then the Recoup as well as Petrified Blood will cover our HP pool with whatever's remaining of the damage that's being dealt. This is what makes this build so tanky. So 50% of the non-chaos damage will now, in this case, with the Corrupted Soul, bypass the energy shield. And what's really cool with this approach is that it kind of goes against that initial idea of our energy shield defensive layer. However, it also gives us maximum HP as energy shield to increase the buffer. So essentially what the Glorious Vanity jewel with Doriani does is countering the main purpose of this. On the other hand, because of how we're now sustaining our energy shield in the higher body version, we are actually leeching on our HP pool, which is actually helping this. What it also does is that we'll be in a position where our energy shield is covering a lot of this damage, and the damage that is bypassing our energy shield is actually covered by Petrified Blood and the defensive mechanics that we have on damages that touches our HP. And this is what makes this build so tanky. Not looking at this number because it actually is not calculated properly. So this is one of the things that makes this really cool. So how does this help us in terms of quality of life? This is when it gets tricky. We would like to have Ritual of Shadows. This is a notable that is dictated on location based of the numerical value of the Glorious Vanity. I'm not going to go too much in depth on how this works, but Glorious Vanity jewels or Glorious jewels or Timeless jewels in general, they have a very wide range of numerical values. So in this case, I have a number 6219. This means that that specific number in this specific location on the tree gives me hierarchy on this position. It gives me Blood Quench Bulwark on that position, Soul Worship on that, and Ritual of Immolation there, and Ritual of Might there, etc. There are two modifiers that we want to get. One is the most important one, and that is Ritual of Shadows. So the Ritual of Shadows, preferably on this specific location, gives us increased chaos damage, but most importantly, withered on hits. With this modifier on for the build, it removes the necessity of Spell Totem Wither. Suddenly, we don't need to cast a totem versus bosses. We will always be able to apply Wither with our own cast from Dark Pact. The second modifier alleviates pressure on our amulet. Now, you can still have leech if you want to, but instead you open up possibilities for higher body gearing, which would be increased damage while leeching, level of skills, critical strike multiplier, etc., etc. And that is by giving us the life leech from the node called Revitalizing Darkness. This gives increased chaos damage, but also our chaos damage leeches HP. So basically, the best jewel for this build is a Glorious Vanity of Doriani with Ritual of Shadows and Revitalizing Darkness on those two specific locations. To help you with this, one of my moderators, Tibokakaka, has created a search window. This search will give you this specific search window to look for Dorianis of this specific position of these nodes. What's really cool with the POB is that you can click on Find the Timeless Jewels in the bottom corner. See if you can see it there on the screen. And by clicking here, you can actually look at Doriani, Corrupted Soul, and Fallback Wage. You can actually look for desired nodes and search for these and fiddle around with this if you want to look for other approaches. But this is how you would look for it. I would recommend starting with a Ritual of Shadows and going from there. I'll leave a link in the descriptions below, of course, for the search that Kelka has been making for us. But this is basically, in my opinion, the best upgrades you can go. So a quick recap again. You want to start with a Volcaress, making sure that you have a Vol Summon Skeleton in it, as mentioned, which you can see over here. And besides this approach, you would also, next upgrade would then be to look at a Divergent Dark Pact, which you can see in the skills section. The other upgrade would then be to make sure that you have a Blessed Rebirth Jewel, no matter how many passives you have. The next upgrade after this would be to start looking at the possibility of upgrading towards the higher budget. And this is, of course, excluding the focus on getting level of skills on your weapons, for example, level of skills on your helmet, which is not even shown in the low budget version. You know, any sort of spell damage, block to spells, and high life and energy shield on your shield, and all of these generic stats. We're talking about big upgrades in what you'd like to focus on. So the next upgrade would not be the Watcher's Eye, but rather look at trying to find a Glorious Vanity. The earlier stage in the league, the harder this will be to find. This will skyrocket later when people start running 5-way carries, and they will be available all over the place. Besides this, you want to look at the possibility of a Watcher's Eye for the discipline with the energy shield on hits. This can sometimes be expensive, especially early in the league, so do keep an eye on it. As long as they're too expensive, just upgrade anything else. Just keep in mind that these will be the ones that have the biggest impact on the character. So outside of this, as long as they're too expensive, you just focus on the other upgrades. And again, as mentioned before, I don't want to prolong this video too much. If you have any questions, fire away. I hope this video helped you navigate through the midst of upgrading the characters, because all the other upgrades you can do, amulet, helmet, whatever you're looking at, they're very linear in upgrading. And the items that I've specifically talked about in this video are the ones that have a significant impact on the way the build is played. I understand the build is very complex and very hard to understand. I hope the video is linked in the description, and this video has helped you get a better understanding of the build, and I hope you guys are having fun with it. So make sure you hit the like button, subscribe for more content. Until next time, stay safe, keep rocking.